Good afternoon, blog viewers. I hope everyone is doing well, and I appreciate the continued readership and followership on the blog. I hope the blog has been helpful to everyone in examining some key ideas about very important human virtues, and I hope that it will continue to be useful. I welcome any comments anyone has that could in any way improve the blog. I would appreciate particularly sort of criticism as to the ideas, and so that the ideas can be refined, and usually ideas can only be refined by negative criticism. So I would appreciate any of that feedback so that we can all use these ideas to better our lives. Because of course we're not talking here on the blog about subjects that are sort of academic or arcane. We're talking about the key virtues of human life. And the key virtues of human life are ones that we have to put into practice every day. And because of that, the more we know about those virtues and the more those ideas become refined, the better we can apply those ideas in everyday life and practice. And so any contribution to any of these virtues that defines them better would be, in effect, an improvement in our lives, all of our lives. So that's very important. Today we're going to talk about the virtue of wealth. And we're going to do it through talking about the first 5 books of Plato's Laws. I've read the whole thing, but we're going to focus today on the first 5 books. Laws was one of the last Platonic works. It was written, let me just make sure this is working. It was written in near the end of Plato's life. Apparently it was not even finished when he died. But it is reputed to be a Platonic dialogue. There were some questions about whether it was genuine, but I think many people now regard it as genuine. But in the Laws, just to give you a brief summary, there are 3 people in the dialogue: the Athenian stranger, there's 2 other dialogue speakers. One is from Crete, and another is from Sparta, a Greek city-states. And these are all old men, and I think they're well into their 70s, older men. And they're talking on a very leisurely journey. They say, well, why don't we start talking and conversing philosophically? Because at this point of our lives, this is what we can best do. And they start talking about what it is what a legislator should do to create the best society. And one of the ideas that comes out pretty quickly is that the legislature, if he really wants to make a society good, he will make laws that maximally aim toward virtue in citizenry. He won't aim for one virtue, which was, I think, some city-states at the time were focused on war. So in war, you need the virtue of courage. And so that was one idea of what a legislature should do: just pass laws that encourage people to develop courage and be warriors. But of course, that's not the only conception of virtue. There are many other virtues. And pretty quickly and repeatedly in the Laws, the Athenian strangers, perhaps Plato's persona in the dialogue, it's not really Socrates, could be Plato's own ideas, says that no, you need to pass laws that aim toward all the virtues of human life, not just courage. Because human life doesn't just consist of war. There's times of war and there's times of peace. So the point is made over and over again that the laws should be aiming at promoting all of the virtues in human life, not just one virtue. And, as we've been talking about this, I've thought virtue as a term sounds kind of stuffy. People don't use the word virtue nowadays. What does Plato really mean when he says virtue? And I think this is expressed at various points in the Laws. I'm going to give you the page references, the Platonic page references. At 628c in the Laws, Plato says that the greatest good that the legislator can strive for is peace and goodwill among men. And by that he means a citizenry where people are harmonious with each other. And in Plato, one of the ideas that comes forward repeatedly is that the harmony and the peace that exists within a state matches that which exists in the soul of an individual. So virtue for Plato was in many ways a state of soul where there was peace and harmony within the soul, and each part of the soul was doing its proper function. Plato thought there were three different parts of the soul. There was reason, there was spirit and appetite. There was spirit, and then there was appetite. Reason was, for Plato, the most divine, the most godlike part of the soul. I think a professor by the name of Miles Burnett sort of summarized this well when he was talking about Aristotle's ideas of happiness. And he said that pure reason, when it knows the truth and when it's thinking about truth, participates in sort of a divine-like quality. Because as God is thinking about the truth, God is always thinking thoughts about human affairs, about science. The man can participate in some extent in those thoughts to the extent that he's utilizing his reason. So when we read the highest summit of human thought, Aristotle's Ethics, Plato's Republic, works like that, we somehow participate in the type of thought that God would partake in. That's sort of the argument that Plato lays down, and Aristotle, I think, similarly. Reason is divine for Plato, and of course he speaks metaphorically. It's not actually that our brains are God, but that there's somewhat of a divine quality to reason. And he describes it further on in the Laws as being somewhat similar to gold. It's the gold within us. And the other parts of the soul, spirit, our desire for honor in a social society where we live among other people, distinctions, ambitions, power over others, prestige, that all goes into our spirit. It's a spirited side of the soul, spirited part of the soul. And then appetites, we're animals, so those are sort of the basic animal drives. Food, drink, sex, pleasures, things of that sort. In a platonically just soul and in a platonically just city, what you have is reason ruling. You have reason not killing spirit or appetite. This is not sort of a monastic view of life, where you don't participate in any appetites, or you have no spirit, a deadened person. But reason controls the appetites and controls the spirit in a way that's good for the whole human being. Reason figures out what's good for man. Reason figures out what's good for the soul, the whole soul, and rules over the other parts. Doesn't deny the soul, the person pleasure, doesn't deny the person spirit, but always controls those other parts of the soul in a way that's best for the human being as a whole. That is the platonically just soul. And by that, Plato, I think, in many respects and throughout his dialogues, that is the conception of virtue that he's talking about. He's not talking about it in terms of some escape from the world, but he's talking about it in terms of some sort of state where reason rules the other parts of the soul and gives the appetites and spirit, controls them in a way that the appetites and the spirit don't run sort of roughshod over the entire person, don't ruin his life, don't wreck everything up, but everything is sort of channeled appropriately and harmonized in the best way. Now, the worst thing for Plato, both for a state and a soul, was when there was war in the soul, when there was conflicting tensions and impulses, and reason had fallen from its throne. Reason was no longer ruling in that person, and the impulses were just having their way. The appetites, spirit, they were battling. The person was sort of torn each way or another, one day this way, one day that way, but there was no order. There was no ruling of reason. There was no smoothness to the person's life. That was one of the worst things for Plato, for that to happen. And in the laws, he says the worst thing for a person is for him to lose to himself, in some sense. That's such a strange formulation. One person, an individual person, losing to himself. What does that mean? I think for Plato it meant that the better parts of the soul lost to the worst parts. Reason as the better part lost, the appetites and spirit won. They had their way with reason. They ruled over the soul, and typically Plato uses again a lot of flowery metaphorical language, which should not be taken literally. But when that happened, you get a platonically unjust person. The person has lost to himself, reason has lost out. The person becomes chaotic, disordered. There's no concord within the soul. There's no harmony within the soul. There's no peace within the soul. In the laws, he says, the Athenian stranger asks, you see, my friends, without concord in the soul, how could you ever even get a glimmer of sound judgment? That's the question. The answer is it's out of the question. Okay. So when we don't have in our soul reason ruling, everything else is, in Plato's view, almost hopeless. It's unlikely that anything good's going to come out of this life. That's his view. You can't even get, when reason has been knocked down, you don't have concord in the soul, and without concord in the soul, without some sort of harmony in the soul, you can't produce good judgments. You can't think rationally. You can't come up with what's good for you. And as a result of all that, your life is going to go badly. This is the Platonic view. Plato makes a similar point about education. Now, education, he says in the laws, there's various types of education. There's various things we can know. A narrow education, Plato says, is one that teaches you how to be good at a specific profession, or how to better your body, or lose weight, make money. Limited parts of your being, not your entire being, not your entire soul. Those sorts of educations, they're not bad, but they're incomplete, Plato says, thinks. The better education, what really deserves the name education, I think, which he says in the laws, and I'm quoting here, is an education in virtue, a training which produces a keen desire to become a perfect citizen who knows how to rule and to be ruled by others as justice demands. Education in virtue, a training which produces a keen desire. But for Plato, it's a common theme throughout the Platonic dialogues. Becoming virtuous is about aligning your pleasures and pains correctly. Same with thought with Aristotle. You have to delight in virtue. You have to bring about a certain sort of soul in the person that they will see the just life as pleasant. That's a point made in the laws too. They will see the unjust life as loathsome. They will see it as disgusting. It's not a matter of the laws of the state. It's a matter of within the soul will instinctually find justice and knowledge and reason is beautiful, and will find all these other things less beautiful or even maybe ugly. And And what education is for Plato is about training people in a way that they come to feel that way about the virtues. A keen desire to be virtuous. I want to quote from the Laws here. What education really is, quote, when the sound of the voice penetrates the soul, we take that to be an education in virtue, and we hazard the term music to describe it. When the sound of this voice penetrates the soul, we take that to be an education in virtue, and we hazard the term music to describe it. So there is a sense in which education is a form of music, in this sense. It's a form of music that penetrates the soul, creates harmony within it, gets reason to rule, in the sense that a good song would sort of delight you and bring you to a better state of feeling and better state of existence. Fine symphony or opera would do that. But that is what education is for Plato. Now, all of this in Plato's Laws is discussed in many, many instances. He discusses these concepts as opposed to the pursuit of wealth. In this post, we'll go under wealth. Now, so far in the blog, we've identified wealth as a virtue, but we've been somewhat critical of the effects of the chase of wealth, and more importantly, how one-sidedly or strongly people go after wealth, to the exclusion of all other things in their life. That's sort of been the critique. We've never expressed the view in the blog that money is bad, that money is evil, that money is useless. Those aren't correct. Okay? In a society when, in a time and an age when money is the medium of exchange between people, any view that money is evil, money is useless, money doesn't matter is incorrect. It's not even that it's simple-minded. It's wrong. Person A needs money to get thing B, thing X from person B. There's two people. There's a thing that's wanted. Money is the medium of exchange. Person B takes the money, then gets whatever else he needs from person C. Gets thing Y from person C. It's a medium of exchange. Okay? And it's needed to get the things that people really need in life. So money is essential in this sense in satisfying man's most basic needs. It's a very important point. Food, shelter, and medical care would be, I think, the most important needs. Food, shelter, and medical care. What's consistent with all those, I would say? Self-preservation. Human being can't survive without food, shelter in many cases, and medical care. Beyond that, why else is money is good? Well, again, a life where, we talked about this in the play post, a life where all you're doing is just taking care of your basic needs over 80 years is not a very interesting life. It's dull. It's not even one that we would choose to live if all we did was just preserve ourselves. So beyond taking care of our basic needs, money is needed to secure certain kind of pleasures for us. And I want to quote again a fascinating passage from Spinoza's Ethics, where Spinoza says, talking about different pleasures of man and the kind of pleasures man enjoys and wants to partake in. Spinoza says, I say it is the part of a wise man to refresh and recreate himself with moderate and pleasant food and drink, and also with perfumes, with the soft beauty of growing plants, with dress, with music, with many sports, with theaters and the like, such as every man may make use of without injury to his neighbor. For the human body is composed of very numerous parts of diverse nature, which continually stand in need of fresh and varied nourishment. These are all good things. Pleasant food and drink, plants, dress, music, sports, theaters, the life we live today, in the year 2012. These are all good things of life. Money is needed to get these things. Money is needed to buy plants. Money is needed to buy a nice shirt. Money is needed to go to a concert. Money is needed to go to watch the Los Angeles Angels play. Money is needed to go to the theater. And these things actually tend to increase over time, the cost of these things. And why is this needed? Spinoza says the body is composed of many different parts of diverse nature, which continually stand in need of fresh and varied nourishment. Plato often tended to diminish the importance of the body. Spinoza says the body, which we always have, needs nourishment and varied nourishment, different types of things. Money is needed to buy those things, to allow those things. I think if we go back to Plato now, I think Plato has a very similar view of wealth that you can see in the laws. Plato doesn't say that money is evil. He doesn't say money is useless. He doesn't say the rich are evil. He's, in many sense, far more sophisticated to make those sorts of simplistic statements. He says that money can be used best when it's in furtherance of a life that is devoted to self-control. When money is used to purchase, and I'm quoting from the laws, mild pleasures, satisfy light appetites, and satisfy desires without frenzy. This is a little bit beyond basically caring for the needs of the body, and a little below sort of extravagantly pursuing every pleasure. Mild pleasures, light appetites, and desires without frenzy. Similar to Spinoza's view, I would say. Money helps to satisfy those things, and it's needed in that respect, and therefore it's a virtue to have money and to pursue it in the right way. Now, he says again, this is at 742a, the ideal amount of money for someone to have is enough for him to take care of his day-to-day dealings. And enough just to take care of the demands of day-to-day life, which again are in furtherance of self-preservation. But in a sense, Plato's concern was not with whether wealth was good or bad, or whether reason itself was good or bad, or the pleasures were good or bad. He didn't think things were this simple. What he really wanted us to focus on was how much we should strive after, or strain for, or labor after reason, wealth, and the very different needs of the body. How much of our time and how much of our attention should we bestow upon these different things? What's the right mix in terms of how much we pursue these things? And I want to read a quote at 724a from the Athenian Stranger. Well, now, the next thing is this. Here's the question. How far should a man concentrate or relax the efforts he devotes to looking after his soul, his body, and his property? This is a suitable topic, and it will be to the mutual advantage of both speaker and listeners to ponder it, and so perfect their education as far as they can. How far should a man concentrate or relax the efforts he devotes to looking after his soul, his body, and his property? None of those things, soul, body, or property, can be ignored. The question for Plato is, how much should we concentrate on them, and how much should we not concentrate on them? And obviously, if we're not concentrating on one thing, we're spending less time on one thing, we're spending more time on the other. And I think, by and large, the answer we get from Plato as to wealth is that wealth is largely, more or less, it can be it's very irrelevant. Once it takes care of the basic needs, it's very irrelevant. And in what sense is it irrelevant? I think Plato says throughout the laws, What really matters is the character of the person, whether he's rich or poor. If the person's character is bad, if their soul is polluted, as he uses the word, if they're unjust, they'll be miserable, no matter how rich they are. That's a classic Platonic teaching. It doesn't matter how much money they have, how wonderful their home is, they'll be miserable within that home. They'll be miserable in their interactions with other people. They'll be unhappy. They'll be unjust. Doesn't matter if they buy the biggest mansion, the biggest cars. It's all irrelevant to Plato. Likewise, you could have someone that has some smallish amount of money to take care of his basic needs, but is very virtuous. He's flourishing as a human person. Reason is ruling his life. He's appreciating and partaking in pleasures as he should, and he will live a very good life under Plato's account. So, for Plato, wealth is not the determinant of how a life goes. Wealth is not the thing we should strive for the most. And to see how irrelevant Plato thinks wealth is in the laws, you get, I think, the best sense of it at 631c, when Plato classifies all the goods for a human being, all the things that are good for us, into two types of things. There's the human goods, and then there's divine goods. The human goods rank below the divine goods. The divine goods are better than the human goods. The divine goods, and he ranks these in order, are wisdom, self-control, justice, and courage. Wisdom being the top, self-control being next, justice, and courage. Now, all of these, wisdom, self-control, justice, and courage, Plato says rank above the human goods of health, beauty, strength, and wealth. Not that any of those things are bad. None of those things he ranks as bad. Health, hardly anyone could say health is bad, or beauty is bad, strength is bad. But that what's better is wisdom, self-control, justice, and courage. And I think the answer that we've been asking for, what should we strive after the most? Obviously, if those goods are better, we would be better off striving after wisdom more, striving after self-control more, striving after justice more, striving after courage more. And I think that's part of it. You see this at 707d when Plato says that the greatest good for man is not simply to survive and continue to exist no matter what the state of his soul is or what kind of life he leads. But the highest good is for him to become as virtuous as possible and to continue in that state as long as life lasts. Virtue rather than mere existence should be what we aim for. Not that mere existence is bad again, but that what we should, while we're existing, we should do everything we can to continue to exist, but we should strive after virtue. Part of the idea here also is if you have the divine goods, I think he says this again at when he discusses the divine and human goods at 631c. If you have the divine goods of wisdom, self-control, justice, and courage, you will have health, you will have beauty, you will have strength, you will have wealth. A wise person will find a way to make money. A wise person will take care of his health. A wise person, self-control will help you to maintain your health as well, and so on. Those goods will produce the human goods, which rank lower for Plato, but are still important. So again, Plato ranks wealth. I want to stress this. Plato ranks wealth in the human goods. First of all, the human goods are again below the divine goods, so we have 4 divine goods above the human goods, and he ranks wealth as last among all the human goods and all the divine goods. Last. That should be pretty surprising that he would do that. It's very different than, I think, the priority system that we live in today in our culture. When the number one concern, I read a few weeks ago, the number one concern of voters in this election was the price of gas. Why would Plato say wealth is last among the human goods? Why does he want to put it below everything else? Well, ideally, again, he says that a man with justice, a man with self-control will use money in the right way. He talks about wine. Similarly, a man of certain character can use certain pleasures, the pleasures of money, the pleasures of wine, fine foods. He'll use it in the right way. But a person that doesn't have those virtues of justice and self-control and wisdom will use everything poorly. That's a very important Platonic point. Everything he touches, he'll ruin in some way, including money. And so, pleasures and plains, he describes it as flowing from a stream. And if a man draws the right amount from the right stream at the right time, he'll be a happy person. All good things have a limit for Plato, including wealth. He rejects the common view at 742d, what he calls a common view, that the point of the state should just be to make more and more money, become as huge as possible. Big state, a lot of money, everything getting bigger and richer. That's not the point, he says. And he says here, now we maintain that the aim of a statesman who knows what he's about is not in fact the one which most people say the good legislature should have. They'd say that if he knows what he's doing, his laws should make the state as huge and as rich as possible. He should give the citizens gold mines and silver mines, and enable them to control as many people as possible by land and sea. He rejects that view. Okay? That's not what the aim of the statesman is about. It's not about making as much money as possible, or giving the citizens gold and silver. That's not the point of a statesman. And so Plato rejects that view and gives us a number of reasons in the laws as to why wealth should rank below all the other virtues. He says, first, a person that gains a lot of wealth, their soul will be filled with pride. Any sort of victory, he says, fills us with pride. And wealth is considered a huge victory, and so someone will become very haughty if they gain a lot of wealth. They will be filled with a million other vices, he says. That's one reason. Another reason is, he says, someone that pursues wealth aggressively will begin to associate with depraved characters and wicked people. And he will no longer react to such people with disgust, but welcome them with pleasure. In the end, he can't escape becoming very much like these people. So if you're chasing wealth, if that's going to be the number one thing you're going after, you're going to find yourself mixed in with people that you don't like, or that you don't share their values. They may have values that you consider, in Plato's view, depraved. But because you're pursuing wealth, you'll be around them. And because of that, those values will rub off on you, so to say. You can't escape that. You can't escape the effects of that. And so that's another negative of chasing after wealth too much. He says in many people, chasing after wealth tends to produce bad emotions, jealousy and envy. Keeping up with the Joneses would be the modern variation of that. You look at people and you're jealous of what they have. It's not a good feeling to have. It makes people very cynical, Plato thought, the chase of wealth. If all things are judged by wealth, then people will, by their actions, show in a country like that every other thing, every other virtue or value is kind of, they'll view everything else very cynically and skeptically. They won't really value it. And that's at 698a. It also, Plato believed, bred a sort of simple-minded mentality in people. Money as a quick fix to everything. That's at 687b. Let me quote that. Again, anyone who notices a case of great wealth or exceptional family distinction or something like that takes precisely the same line. He assumes that just because a man enjoys these advantages, his every wish will be granted, or at any rate most of them, and the most important ones. 687b. The thought is there that people think money is a cure-all. It's not. They chase it as if it's a cure-all, and in the end, there is disappointment when they realize it cannot solve every problem. It cannot maybe even solve the most important problems that exist in a man's heart. But it's chased for so long that by the time someone realizes that, it may be too late to make certain changes. Plato goes on and says that chasing wealth in this sense can wreck the tranquility and harmony of a person's soul and character. That's at 714a. Let me read that. Take an individual man that lusts in its heart for pleasure and demands to have its fill of everything at once, the perpetually unsatisfied victim of an evil greed that attacks it like the plague. Well, as we said just now, if power like that controls an individual and rides roughshod over the laws, it's impossible to escape disaster. So, again, it's not wealth that's bad per se, it's the desire that is unquenched, perpetually unsatisfied, demands to have its fill, lusts in its heart, no end, no limits, perpetually unsatisfied, riding roughshod over everything else, causing disaster. Another extreme formulation by Plato, extreme language, but I think trying to make a point that probably people can relate to in some sense or another. Finally, he says, what's the point of all the money you make? You're going to leave it all for your kids, which often happens with the kid. Well, if they leave a lot of money for their kids, that's not even good for the kids, Plato says, or seems to say. It's not good for them because they'll become lazy, proud. What's better for your kids than leaving them a lot of money, Plato says, is to teach them how to be good, decent people. That's what matters. That's what's more important. Not leaving them with a ton of money. Not that leaving them with money not that the two are, necessarily exclusive or conflicting, but there's tendencies that operate here. Now, Plato, I think, knows in a sense that everyone knows these things at some level. Many of these things are things that we were taught when we were small kids. This is sort of what happens, I think, for Plato, is he says these are things that we know, but these are things that we forget over time. And we don't really, even if we know them, we don't act on them. I think Aristotle said it very well in the Ethics when he said that people that are operating under the influence of certain passions, whether for wealth or something else, they can drum up the same cliches about money not being the most important things, or whatever else, similar things. But they're repeating it as a child would, stringing words together. They don't know what it means. They don't act accordingly. It's all sort of a show. It's all sort of words strung together. Probably some of the harshest words in Aristotle's Ethics are in that section when he makes that point. Doesn't seem to appreciate that. And so, one thing that Plato says here is these are ideas that people know, but they don't act upon it. And so, what good is it if people aren't acting on it? Plato seems to think the only way that someone can prevent this from happening, from these ideas, to leave our sight and not factor into our calculation of what's good for us, the only way that can happen is if we repeatedly ask ourselves, repeatedly rank the different goods of life, repeatedly think about these questions, repeatedly prioritize. And this is at 744a. And ask ourselves certain questions about wealth and the other things we're pursuing. I want to read from 744a here. But if any of these laws subsequently passed is found giving pride of place to health in the state rather than the virtue of self-control, or to wealth rather than health, and habits of restraint, then quite obviously its priorities will be wrong. So the legislature must repeatedly try to get this sort of thing straight in his own mind by asking, what do I want to achieve? And am I achieving it or am I off target? If he does that, perhaps he'll complete his legislation by his own efforts and leave nothing to be done by others. There's no other way he could possibly succeed. These questions, again, these points we've made about wealth, they're well known. They're subject of movies we've all seen, articles in the news. But if we don't continue to ask ourselves these questions, prioritize what we're going for in life, see what's good about them, what their real value is, it'll get lost in the shuffle, so to say, I think Plato's saying. It'll get lost. We'll just continue living the kind of life we were living, and in the end, it may cause certain undesirable things to happen. Now, in general, I would say I'm not certain this is so much. Sometimes Plato's view of money has been characterized as idealistic, naive. I'm not so sure it is, in some sense. He doesn't deny that money is needed to satisfy certain goods, both essential goods and even pleasures that one would want in a decent life, but that beyond that, it causes a lot of problems. But in a whole, you could say, this is how the relationship to money that Plato draws for man in the laws is an ideal view. It's not one that we see in the world very often. It's not one we find in the world very often. This is not how most people think of money. The question is, should they think more of money in the sense Plato thinks about it? Is the ideal right? And if the ideal is right, should we all try to harmonize our views more with the ideal? Strive after the ideal while knowing we'll probably never reach the ideal. Is that the right approach? Plato says you should live, when you come up with an ideal view of how a human being should live, you should spare, and I'm quoting here from the laws, you should spare no detail of absolute truth and beauty. You should make it the ideal perfectly true and perfectly beautiful. Then, he says, you should try to work it out in your life. And if you find any of the specific details are impractical, then you may need to place it to the side. I don't have the... let me see if I can find the line reference for that. I think it's at... this is at 746C. But I believe that in every project for future action, when you're displaying the ideal plan that ought to be put into effect, the most satisfactory procedure is to spare no detail of absolute truth and beauty. But if you find that one of these details is impossible in practice, you ought to put it on one side and not attempt it. You should see which of the remaining alternatives comes closest to it and is most nearly akin to your policy, and arrange to have that done instead. So, ideals in this sense are what we come up with ideally. Try to make the ideal as beautiful and true and perfect as possible. We aim to implement the ideal. If there's sections of it that are impractical, we put those aside, and then we look for alternatives that most closely approximate the ideal. So in that sense, I would not say Plato's views here are extremely idealistic or impractical. They're actually very realistic. And to see how this is so, let's take an example. Let's consider someone that's in a certain job, whatever the job is, and they're making a lot of money. But given the way the world is now, they're making a lot of money, but they're working all the time. Plato said, what's really good for us, the goods of the soul are the best, the goods of the body are the next, and after that, the goods of appetites. Now, is it good for your is it good for your body to be working all the time? No. Again, remember, Plato said point of money is to care for your soul and to care for your body. Now, is working all the time good for your body? Obviously not. You are sedentary, you aren't exercising, you're getting stressed out, you're not getting exposed to sunshine, you're in a cramped place. And there's a lot of negatives to that. Is it good for your soul? Maybe not, probably not. You're not focusing on a lot of other virtues. You're just focused on one or two things at work. You're neglecting other things, responsibilities to others and family members and your own self-development. So, in that sense, it would not be good for you. Not good for your body, not good for your soul. You might be making a lot of money, but the cost of that is very high. So the net result of all of it is not very good, because it's damage to your body, damage to your soul. So then you would have to think, okay, can I find a job where, can I change this job that I'm at in any way, shape, or form so that I can more better pursue what's good for my body and my soul? Can I ask for certain arrangements, flex time, less demanding responsibilities, maybe take less pay in exchange for all this? All of this to allow me to continue to prevent any harm that the job is doing to my body and prevent any harm it's doing to my soul, and to use that extra time to get the other parts working perfectly. That's one thing you can do. If you can't do that, if you have to keep doing that job, then you would say, maybe I'm going to only do this for a little while longer, and I'm going to look for an alternative. And if you can't do that, then I think at some point you'll just probably have to make some changes, get another job, maybe take less pay. You may have to reduce certain expenses in your life, take less vacations, buy less TVs, buy less clothes. You'll have to make some sacrifices. But the sacrifices are I think under Plato's view, would be better. And on a net basis, it'd be better because you'd be strengthening your soul, you'd be purifying your soul, you'd be tending to your body better. The benefits would outweigh any negative and sort of slight loss of income, or maybe even substantial loss of income. So in the end, I think Plato's argument, I think, on wealth here is, it all rests, I think it all comes back to his argument that the most important thing, I think at one point he says in the law, is that the human being's most important possession and the thing you should care for the most is the soul. And the beauty of the soul and the health of the soul ranks above everything else for Plato. It's the only thing it's not the only thing that matters, but it's the thing that matters most. And that everything you do in the world, including making money, the pleasures that you pursue, should in some way or another, even if it's remote, promote the health of your soul. Make it more beautiful, preserve it, strengthen it, keep the different parts of the soul in harmony, reason, ruling over the other parts, but not killing the other parts, keeping the soul as harmonic and purified as possible. And to a lesser extent, keeping the body as pure and healthy as possible. That's the point of wealth. Once it does those things, there's not a lot of advantage beyond what it's doing. If you don't accept this view that that's the most important thing, then most of Plato's arguments won't make any sense to you. They won't change your actions, and if they don't change your actions, change your way of prioritizing things. The whole enterprise is kind of worthless. If you're not taking the argument seriously, if you're not looking to get improved through philosophy and reading this stuff, there's no point doing it. You might as well not do it. You might as well just continue doing what you're doing. There's no point to read this stuff and then not take it seriously. So if you deny that the health of the soul is the most important thing for you, then a lot of these arguments won't make sense. But if you don't accept the view that the health of the soul is the most important, then you, I think, have to give some alternative account of what's most important in life. And that account has to make some sense to you. And if there's no soul, if there's no concept of beauty of the soul, if there's no concept of real values that are strong enough for you to take seriously and make changes in your life, I think it can be a kind of a depressing view of life if you don't view the soul and the health of the soul as being very important. I'm not sure I've heard a very good account of what should matter more than the health of the soul. And certainly willing to hear something like that, but I haven't heard it so far. And I think anyone that wants to resist Plato's ideas here and challenge them first has to understand the ideas. He's not saying money's not important. He's not saying it's useless. He's not saying it can't satisfy certain pleasures and basic needs. He's not saying any of those things. He's just ranking it below a lot of other things and telling people that in actuality, in their actions, they should strive for the other things more because they're more valuable, they're more beautiful, they're more promotive of the soul's health. That's his argument. So you can't get around Plato's argument by saying, well, we need money. I need money. I need money to take care of my basic needs. That's not going to get around his argument. What you need to come up with, I think, to defeat Plato's argument here about wealth is to show that there are things above the health of the soul that matter more than the health of the soul, and that money can actually bring those things about. And that's a tough argument. That's a really hard argument to show money. First of all, money can bring about things better than the health of the soul, and second, that there are things that matter more than the health of the soul in life. Over an entire human life, not over a day, not over a month, not over a year, but over an entire human life, there are things that matter more than the soul, the health of the soul, and that money can actually help fulfill those things. That's a tough argument. I can't think of an argument to make that would support that argument, and so I'm sort of left with largely thinking that Plato's views of money here, refined in the way we've tried to refine them, make a lot of sense. But I'm certainly open to other arguments. And further than that, I think one thing we could say is we should think about what, again, the function of intelligence is and reason. Sort of mentioned in the beginning. But if reason is only a function to figure out how you can get what you want out of life, with divorced of thinking about what's good for you, then I don't think, again, none of these arguments are going to make sense to anyone. But if reason and thinking and thought and intelligence are, their best uses are figuring out what is good for you as a human being, and to what extent, then I think it's hard to say that things beyond truth and goodness and beauty matter more in life. And I think wealth cannot ever rank above those things. And if it can't rank above those things, then putting it above those things means you've misprioritized things in your life. There's no other way to get around the argument. If wealth is not better than truth and better than goodness and better than beauty, then any life that devotes itself to wealth more than those things is misprioritized. And in Plato's view, based on his view of the soul and his view of human life, that's not a life that can go very well. It's hardly at 30 or 31, it's hardly a question I can answer with much sort of assurance from an empirical perspective, but logically the argument makes a lot of sense. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.